I'm your host Tori, and this week we're reviewing the InWin 305. Stepping away from their typically high-priced, premium designs, InWin takes a stab at the more general consumer market with a case that's easy on both the eyes and the wallets. Distinct for its minimalist stripe of brushed aluminum on the front panel, it's also available in sleek, laser-etched natural wood for the white variant. The 305 is InWin's answer to those that don't necessarily want flashy lights or logos on their desk. The understated look of both the black and white versions of the case allow for seamless integration into any minimalistic gaming or professional setup. While InWin's logo is on the front panel, the size and lack of a backlight make you forget it's even there. The front panel primarily features a large pane of tempered glass with either a strip of brushed aluminum or wood accompanying it on the right side, depending on which version of the case you opted for. The front of the case features two USB 3.0 ports, two USB 2.0 ports, as well as your standard audio input and output. We particularly like the design of the large power button that blends in effortlessly with the textured strip. It's quite a hefty push, which certainly helps avoid accidental power-offs. No reset button, but that's not a deal breaker. The side panel that looks into the system is a full pane of thick tempered glass featuring toolless entry. In order to remove it, all you have to do is simply press the button on the handle at the top and the panel opens right up. These panes of glass are seriously thick. We accidentally dropped one from about 5 feet and it was totally unscathed. The other side panel is made of steel, features a unique hexagon pattern for the vents, and has two handy thumb screws to secure it to the case. Making our way to the back of the case, we see the no-frills trend continues, with the entire panel being nearly solid except for the cutouts for the PSU, I/O shield, 120mm fan, and PCIe brackets. We would have liked to see a few more vents in the back panel to allow more air to be brought in or exhausted, since the front panel is completely solid and all the other ventilated areas of the case have fans. The bottom of the case features the only dust filter included with the 305, snuggled between its 2 feet. Making our way into the case, the main chamber appears to be quite roomy. However, a standard ATX board occupies the entire motherboard space, leaving little room for cable management holes. We managed fine, though it did take some nimble fingers. While this isn't the end of the world, we did have to string our EPS power cable and front panel connectors all the way across the motherboard. Though there's plenty of room for component configuration, cable management can be a challenge in the 305. Each of the SSD mounts on the front have their own cable management cutout. The cutout for the 24-pin cable is fine if you don't plan on custom sleeving it. However, it isn't quite wide enough to accommodate the full circumference of a sleeved 24-pin cable. It isn't immediately obvious which cutout is meant for the PCIe cables. We initially assumed they would go through the cutout at the bottom of the main chamber, but our stock cables were not long enough to reach the PSU. We had to run them through the only remaining cable management cutout, which was the one that also has to be shared with the 24-pin. For reference, we're using InWin's Classic Series 900-watt PSU, which lists the length of the cable as 600mm. It also would have been nice if the cutouts had rubber grommets to help hide the cables. Heading around the back, we see that the reason the cutout holes for cables are so small is due to the positioning of the modular 3.5-inch drive trays. There is, however, plenty of room for cable management in the back, particularly at the top of the case. For managing the cables, InWin has included zip ties that can be used to secure the cables to several pairs of holes. This does work perfectly fine, but we missed the Velcro that is commonly found on most modern cases, so we could make adjustments without having to cut and redo zip ties. For storage, this case supports at maximum 2 2.5-inch and 2 3.5-inch drives, or 4 2.5-inch. There are 3 slots in the main chamber for the 2.5-inch drive sleds, but only 2 are included. We opted to put them right next to each other to fill the empty space, as well as keeping the logos on the drives themselves all facing the same direction. The sleds themselves feel solid and well fitted to their spaces. You screw in the SSD with 4 screws, line up the sled inserts into the appropriate cutout, and they're easily secured with a thumb screw. On the back side, we have 2 larger sleds that each accommodate 3.5-inch drive or a 2.5-inch drive. We didn't end up using the back sleds in our build, but it's nice to have the versatile options. Next to the front-mounted 2.5-inch drives, we have the adjustable GPU bracket. This bracket was a breeze to install and did actually help with the sag our water-cooled GPU was experiencing. The whole mechanism does seem like it takes up a lot of space in the case, but it would support multiple brackets for multiple GPUs, though only one is included. Before we dive into installation, let's take a look at the top chamber. The power supply occupies about half of the chamber, though this will vary depending on which PSU you're using. The good news is you'll be able to fit the largest ATX PSU you can find. Do keep in mind though, you'll want to decide what size radiator you're putting up top before you go out and buy the biggest power supply you can find. What we like about this chamber is that it's large and provides plenty of options. The radiator and fans can be mounted inside the cage or out. No matter what size PSU you choose, there's still plenty of room for tubing, extra cable length, or even a pump and reservoir if you decide. It is important to note that this case only allows you to orient your PSU in one direction, which is with the fan pulling air from inside of the case. We really would have preferred to be able to flip it around and pull fresh air from outside, but unfortunately not possible with the screw orientation on the rear panel. It's also worth noting that if you have a PSU with a premium finish, you want to be extra careful not to scratch it when installing it like we did. RIP gorgeous PSU brushwork. Jumping into installation, the first thing you'll probably notice is that the case does not have all of its motherboard standoffs installed by default. This is presumably to accommodate those who may be putting ITX boards in this case and don't want the extra standoffs to be seen. In one of the baggies, you'll find the remaining standoffs as well as an adapter for a Phillips head screwdriver in order to secure them to the case. If you aren't familiar with an ATX or MATX motherboard layout, then we suggest you read the manual before installing. When installing the I/O shield, you'll need to be aware that it does not have a set position. You need to place your motherboard in and make sure you install the shield so it lines up properly. Installing the front panel connectors is easy. We particularly like the fact that Inwind decided to use the short and flat connector for the front USB 3.0 ports compared to the large and stiff one used by most manufacturers. We really like the fact that the PCI brackets are floating, meaning that there are no pieces of metal between each slot. It gives it a very clean look that distinguishes itself from the competition. Where the 305 really shines though is custom liquid cooling if you're going that route. Considering the price and size of the 305, there are a surprisingly large amount of options. Inwind's marketing only specifies that we can install a 360 radiator on the top and a 120 radiator on the back. However, you can actually fit a 360 radiator on the bottom of the case as well. We installed EK's PE360 here, but if you want to put a little less stress on the front panel cables, we would recommend either putting the fans between the case and the radiator, or using a radiator like the SE360 that isn't as wide as most. Keep in mind, you should be aware of how many PCI slots you'll need when deciding if you want to install a radiator on the bottom or not. Now the top radiator is a bit trickier. Inwind's marketing tells us we can fit a 360 up here. The problem is that our PSU has to intake air from the case interior because of that screw config we mentioned earlier. If we put a 360 radiator up there, the PSU is going to intake hot air straight from the radiator. Our recommendation is to stick with a 240. We opted to install it inside the cage, but the cables coming out of the PSU did end up being a little tight, though once it was complete, they all looked so good nestled in there. Thanks to the ample room in the back of the case, we were able to keep the tubing runs really clean. And here's our completed build in the Inwind 305. Overall, we really like what Inwind has accomplished with such minimalistic design without sacrificing the functions and features that you need in a case. There's a ton of modular options, which really stands out in a case that's relatively small. And like all good minimalist designs, they've slimmed off the excess without removing the real practical aspects of the case that you need, just streamlined and beautified it. It's also amazing that all of this gorgeous design, spacious interior, and modular options come in a case that's only $115. For the savvy consumer, this is a great rate for a premium feeling case. Let us know in the comments what your favorite part of our build is and what case you'd love to see us build in next. Until next time, don't stop building. Never stop, never stopping. Don't build the future when you can build the now.